I'm Michael Wolff. I'm an author. I've written altogether, I believe, 12 books, could be 13, but four of them are about Donald Trump, and two more are about Rupert Murdoch.
So, to begin with, then, you've spent a huge amount of time as a writer and a researcher with three of the most diabolical people of the 20th and the 21st century. So, Rupert Murdoch, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. Was there a common thread between them when it comes to the nature of power in America?
Well, I think there's a common thread between them, the nature of character, and I say that in a writerly sense. I mean, these are guys who are, from a writer's point of view, interesting to get down on paper. So that's really the attraction to me. Power, I suppose. I have a certainly a background in considering people's yen for power and how what power does to them. But most of all, this is about who do I think it would be interesting to write about? Who can who has a character that I think that I can get on the page? And these guys are certainly represent an aspect of that.
And why do you think Murdoch approached you to write the book about him? Why did he possibly think that was a good idea?
Well, I mean, I get asked this question a lot about a lot of these people and these subjects. How do I get into these rooms? And I can't answer that. I would say there's a, you might even call it a fundamental duplicity about me. And I say that without the intention to be duplicitous. But I just kind of stand there. I don't really express myself. I'm to a certain degree neutral or amenable or a good listener, I suppose. And there's sort of a background. I mean, I am a man of a certain age. I have been doing this for quite some time. I tend to know the circles these people move in. I tend to know people they know. And I think that there's a sense, an initial sense anyway, which is often sorely disappointed, comes to sorely a disappointment on their part, that I'm comfortable, even trustworthy.
And do you think to some extent you almost play the role of the confessor or the confessee?
I'm not sure that they would think about this. I think I'm just someone who's listened. They get to talk about what they want to talk about. I mean, when I spent all this time with Rupert Murdoch, I mean, Rupert Murdoch is singularly focused on questions about media. I mean, it's just almost 100% of his focus. And I had the feeling when I spent all this, and I spent about a year with him, I had the feeling that he had worn out everyone else around him. And so suddenly I came along and everyone kind of pushed me into the place, you speak to him. And I did, and that was a kind of obviously a fascinating year and produced a book about him. I mean, I think they see me as a smart person and they're flattered to have a smart person tell their story. And then it when it turns out poorly for them, it's everybody, they're risk takers. They get annoyed, but they do shrug it off.
And what kind of book do you think Murdoch expected you to write versus the book that you ended up writing? What was the difference between those two things?
I kind of know what that was. That I mean, he called me up. There was before the book came out, the Murdoch people, Murdoch's son-in-law, Matthew Freud, a presence in London, or his then son-in-law, a presence in London, well connected, and he managed to purloin a copy in the UK. So they had a manuscript of the book before the book was published. And I remember that there was a suddenly an incredible flurry of panic on their part. With Murdoch calling me up, he must have called me up 25 times. I get these messages, and I sort of knew what was happening, and I didn't know what to do. So I finally composed myself and called him back. And he was apoplectic about the whole thing. And he said, and I said, okay, what are your issues? What, tell me, because I do not, and I continue not to think the book is not a negative portrayal. And he said, and he stammered. I mean, he stammers about everything, but in this case, he really stammered and couldn't get it. And he said, it's just so personal. And I said, well, Rupert, it's a biography. And I realized that his idea of a biography isn't quite an everything about him is quite old-fashioned, but this he also had an old-fashioned idea of this. A biography was a chronological tale of one's accomplishments and perhaps challenges, but the emphasis on the accomplishments of the great man. Now, I actually think that that's part of what my book does, but it explains those accomplishments in a personal light. Who is this man? What's his motivations? Where is he? Who is he to who is he? So the reader, my job is for the reader to have some to come for me to bring the reader as close as possible to the experience of being with this person, the experience that I have had.
And I'd argue that you do humanize him quite considerably in that book when you talk about his relationship with his family, the relationship with his daughter, particularly, for example, and the rolling kind of difference in which child is close to him and which isn't, and also his reliance on having a wife, whoever that wife might be.
Right. No, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think my portrait of Rupert Murdoch is a vivid one, and I think it's a pretty accurate one. And many of the people around Murdoch, who I'm still off many of them friendly with, and even members of his own family will often nod to that I'm the one who has come as close to capturing Murdoch as any journalist at this point.
And how much of the politics of Fox News is driven by his own convictions, and how much is about pressing the right buttons to generate the most profit?
Fox News is the politics of Fox News is generated by Fox News itself. It's an organization that runs on merely on ratings. And they test those things constantly, and the rating mechanism gives them that kind of feedback. And that's what they do. It is ratings, ratings, ratings. There's nothing else that matters. Now, this is a little different from when Roger Ailes was running it, because then Roger Ailes was dictating the politics with a keen eye toward ratings, but also he had his own agenda. That agenda doesn't exist anymore, and now it is wholly ratings driven, with Murdoch himself having very little input in this. And when he does have input in it, it goes awry.
In what ways?
Well, it was his idea after January 6th to support the candidacy of Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, the 2024 Republican nomination. And he basically said, we're going to have Ron DeSantis on the Fox air all the time and not let Donald Trump on the air, keep him off the air. And that's how we're gonna make sure that Donald Trump is never the president of the United States again, and Ron DeSantis will be the Republican candidate. So anyway, that obviously didn't work out, and it had a depressive effect on Fox ratings. And eventually, soon enough, Ron DeSantis was off the stage. Donald Trump was back on the stage, and the ratings were again ascendant.
And will Lachlan Murdoch be as important and a powerful a force as Rupert Murdoch?
No, Lachlan Murdoch is a non-entity. He's just at best, a passing figure, not a, not a very serious person, not a kind of, a lightweight, and a person who is not really engaged in either the media business, the Fox politics, or anything much. I can't actually even think of what Lachlan Murdoch would like to achieve except not to be thrown out of his job, and you know and perhaps the getting the approval of his father.
So do you think the nature of the game now, when it comes to media and the power of influence, is such that there'll never be a figure like Rupert Murdoch ever again? So obviously we've got some kind of analogies. Larry Ellison certainly seems to be. Do you think Larry Ellison is the most powerful media magnate in America right now?
I mean, it's a measure of the media's waning influence that I have really not thought about that question for quite some time. And I would say no. I mean, there is not going to be a replacement at this point of time. In the future, who knows, the reconfiguration of the media business, the leadership and ownership of social media, what happens there, we don't know. That's ever evolving on an almost daily basis. I mean, what Larry Ellison and his son are doing in a business which is all about decline. I guess you just do it because you have so much money. Why the hell not? But you certainly are not going to achieve a vision of media dominance and supremacy as you might have in decades past.
And do you also think that part of the reason that Trump is so Teflon coated is because in the last 10, 15 years, traditional newspaper media has declined and social media has risen, that there's been a kind of inflation of scandal, where basically scandals that would have brought down these kind of figures 20 years ago simply don't have the currency that they used to have?
Well, I'm not sure about that. Scandal continues to bring down a lot of people. It just doesn't bring down Donald Trump. So I think that Donald Trump remains a unique figure in this regard of being able, in some sense, to make scandal work for him. That the entire Donald Trump point of view is about attention, good attention, bad attention. It doesn't make any difference. It is just about attention. And he has harnessed that attention and monetized that attention and turned it into the only real political currency.
So, for most of the decade from 2016, Trump was under fire and threat from multiple directions, be it legal, political, or financial. All these threats now seem in the rearview mirror. Has this changed his psychology, behavior, or the way he does things?
No, I quite the opposite. I think that he always saw that those threats in a way that normal political observers and the basic political intelligence did not. He saw them as conflict, and all conflict is valuable and good, and that is the essence of attention and the essence of what brings people to the edge of their seat when the subject is Donald Trump and has really created what he is. Conflict, 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 which is the essence, by the way, of course, of reality television, which is his fundamental training ground. He has always made reality what he wants it to be. He's always been removed in his own way from actual or ordinary reality. He is a showman. That's the way he has thrived. That's what motivates him. Look at me, look at me, look at me. When I first interviewed Trump in the political phase of his life, which would have been in the spring of 2016, when it was still unlikely, to say the least, preposterous, I might say, for that he would become the president of the United States. I said, okay, tell me, why are you doing this? And without hesitation, he said, to be the most famous man in the world. That is good. And again, good, bad, whatever. It wasn't to be a hero, it was to be famous. And it is that motivation that I think that has taken him through, in which every episode, good episode or bad episode, that confronts him. And even, Russia, yeah, sure, but it was again conflict. He could see that in at every moment. He sees this, he sees the attention he's getting, he sees that he is the center of attention. And even to the extent, I mean, in the 2024 campaign, the subject of my book, All or Nothing, he has four criminal indictments. Four criminal indictments. He could have, the likelihood was that he would go to jail for the rest of his life. And The in any normal world, if you're indicted, if you have criminal indictments against you, well, certainly in most respects the jig is up, and you try to salvage what you can. You plea bargain, you do something. Well, he didn't do any of that. He confronted all of this and in fact was convicted in the one set of indictments that came to trial. And at the same time understanding that this was, and this is certainly a high risk strategy, this was his way back to the presidency. It was this conflict that kept him at the center of the public eye, and that gave him this thing to fight against, which is what he always needs. Who's the enemy? Where's the conflict? So, in every other politician, their instinct is to run from conflict. Conflict is something you don't want or you want to minimize if you're a political figure. For Donald Trump, it is the exact opposite because he's a reality television figure where conflict is the thing that pays the bills.
So do you think if he hadn't been under attack in all those various ways in 2016, he would have just found conflict somewhere, basically?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Epstein and Trump and Melania. What is the relationship between Melania and Epstein?
Trump and Epstein, their obsession was models. That's what they did during the 1990s. Supermodels, runway models, catalog models, girls who just dreamed of being models. That was their the currency that they saw, the status that they sought, and the sexual the fetish in some sense that they indulged in. And obviously, Melania, an Eastern European model at that time, and this is the late 1990s, steps right into this. Part of the modeling community, the introduced but to Trump in her version by a modeling agent. Both Epstein and Trump have interests in the modeling business, in modeling agencies, in beauty pageants for Trump, in Victoria's Secret for Epstein. So this is all comes out of the same culture. And so the question is, what was that story? What is the full story there? I mean, I know from what Epstein has told me about the relationship of Trump to Melania, and I have talked about that in a number of venues, and Melania or her lawyers responded to that, and they said, well, if you continue to talk about this, actually, if you don't apologize for talking about this and retract what you've said about this, we are going to sue you for $1 billion. Now, in New York State, where I live, and in fact, where Melania Trump lives, there are laws expressly against using such threats to intimidate perfectly legitimate speech. And so, as soon as this happened, as soon as they threatened me with a lawsuit, my lawyers went into court and sued them under what are called anti-slap statutes. And as somebody I know, a friend of mine in the White House said, well, nobody saw that coming. So we will now fight this out. And one of the things that this does, because we're in this litigation, it is that it gives me the power to subpoena her husband, their friends, their circles, modeling agents, anybody who might shed light on the relationship between Donald Trump, Melania Trump, and Jeffrey Epstein. So I am in a position to answer that question in some detail, or they will have to answer that question under oath before a court reporter.
And what did Epstein tell you about his relationship with Melania?
He said, which was one of the things that they are threatening to sue me about, that Donald Trump and Melania Trump first had sex on his airplane. So again, and there are other allegations about their relationship, and I think you have to see this as a specific social circle. And I think what it goes to the point here, and the point that we should never get too far away from is that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were two guys joined at the hip, joined at the hip for almost 15 years. I mean, that they were the best of friends. They were probably, I believe, the most important relationship each other has had in life. And I would say that they are kind of the same person. Their interests the same, their motivations the same. They spent an enormous amount of time together. They were deeply involved in each other's lives and business, except one ended up dead in the darkest prison in America, and the other ended up in the White House. So that's an irreconcilability. Is that the word? Anyway, it's an irreconcilable situation. That's why the Epstein story continues, because through that Epstein window, you see this fundamental contradiction in American life.
And so, did Epstein date Melania?
I will be asking her that question under oath.
Because that's what Andrew Loney posited in his book.
It is. I did not posit that. He posited that. So, but that is certainly a question that will be explored.
What other questions will you be asking Melania? What are the sort
Well,
of
I
top
think I
three?
think the entire her entire history, how she came to this country, how she managed to get the proper work visas, who she knew, how she supported herself. This is again, she's the window into this modeling world that Epstein and Trump were so obsessed with.
How important a source was Jeffrey Epstein when you were writing your books?
He was a significant. I mean, I found that Epstein knew Donald Trump very well and was very clear-eyed about Donald Trump, very perceptive about Donald Trump, full of details about Donald Trump. I mean, the two people that I found who offered consistently the best critiques of why Donald Trump did what Donald Trump did were Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon.
And they were friends.
They were, yes.
So there was a claim circulating that Epstein offered the New York Times photos of Trump with young girls in bikinis during the 2016 campaign, and that the Times declined them. What do you make of that story? And does it fit with anything that you've learned in your own reporting?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a set of photographs, and I don't know if this is what are being referred to there. There's a set of photographs with Donald Trump and a series of young women around Jeffrey Epstein's pool in Palm Beach. And I have seen there's about a dozen photographs that Epstein had. And three of them I specifically remember, and in two topless girls, they're in bikinis, but they're topless, are sitting on Donald Trump's lap. In the third one, he's standing, but he has a telltale stain on the front of his pants, and the girls, three, four, five, I don't quite remember, are pointing at it and laughing, and they are also topless in bikinis, but topless. So are those the pictures that were offered to the New York Times? I don't know, but those are the pictures that I have seen, and pictures which I knew that Epstein kept in his safe. His safe was later raided and emptied by the FBI. Were those pictures in at the time? I don't know, but reasonably they might well have been.
In The Death of Jeffrey Epstein, your brilliant chapter at the end of your book, Too Famous, that you've
The
also
la
posted,
the last days of Jeffrey Epstein.
sorry, The Last Days of Jeffrey Epstein, which you've recently posted on Substack, but was
Yes,
also included in a collection of your writing called Too Famous in 2021, I believe.
exactly.
It's very clear that Jeffrey Epstein's antipathy towards Trump is profound, and that he's to some extent trying to bring him down. Why didn't he succeed? I mean, he could have released these pictures online. There were lots of other ways to get this story out. Obviously, he did it through you in your books, but why didn't he go further?
I think he was afraid. I know he was afraid. He was afraid of Donald Trump. Absolutely.
And do you think Donald Trump knew that he was talking behind his back with you, with Steve Bannon, that he was recording these videos? So you have an extraordinary scene in that chapter, The Last Days of Jeffrey Epstein, where Epstein's being coached by Bannon. And then he's also coached by this London PR company in the flat in Paris. Do you think Trump knew that these conversations were going on? And do you think that part of the reason that Epstein was arrested was because of what he was trying to expose about Trump?
Well, I don't know. I know that there are two theories which have to do with his arrest. Well, there are two straightforward theories, and then there's a somewhat more complicated theory. But theory one is that Epstein had started to talk about his relationship with Donald Trump, quite specifically in my book, Siege, which came out in June 2019. That book came out. Epstein was in Paris at the time. When Epstein read it days after it came out, he called me and he said, "Oh, I think I may have gone too far." And at any rate, Epstein returned to the US from Paris and was promptly arrested on the tarmac of Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Was that the reason that he had gone too far? I don't know. Because there's the opposite theory is that his arrest was arranged by the Southern District in New York. The Southern District is a part of the Justice Department, but has always been enormously independent and was then conducting its own investigation of Donald Trump. Therefore, therefore, the theory is that Epstein was arrested so that they could squeeze him for information about Donald Trump. And the third, more complex theory involves the Justice Department screwing up over his initial arrest in 2005 and the deal they did with him in 2008. And in order not to be held accountable for that, and there was a judge at that time that was about to throw out the deal or try to throw out the deal that they had made. And so to preempt that, they rearrested Epstein. Anyway, that's those are the theories.
And how was it that so many incredibly rich, famous, influential, and powerful people were able not just to see past Epstein's crimes, but to fully embrace him as a friend?
This is somewhat a question of context, which is hard to reconstruct at this point. But Epstein got out of jail in 2010. He was convicted of or pled guilty to two counts of prostitution, one with an underage girl, but that was what he was not at that moment in time the the monster that we now see him as. It was far from clear to anyone except perhaps the victims who did not yet have a voice in this or whose voice was not yet heard. It was far from clear what he was doing was on a much larger scale, an industrial scale. So he is a rich person in New York who has gone to jail for for things that no one is going to approve of, but he has gone to jail and he has served his time and he is out. And in the social world of New York, I mean, New York is filled with a lot of very wealthy, dubious people. And add to that the fact that he was an interesting guy surrounded by interesting people who other people very clearly wanted to get to know, generous to a fault. At some point you get to the point which is that, I mean, other than the fact that he had been to jail and served his time, it was like, what's not to like? And even then, and I got to talking to him in 2014, but it was unclear entire. I mean, there was no clear picture of what he had done. It's certainly, again, no clear picture of the scale of what we've come to understand he was involved with.
Lots has been written about Epstein's relationship with Andrew and Fergie, but you describe in that chapter about the last days of Epstein photographs in his house of him with various members of the British royal family. Who were the other members of the royal family who he was pictured with?
I don't even quite remember that. I mean, I know that he had both he and Trump, they had this competition in the 90s about who could sleep with Diana first. And Epstein was her escort, her official escort at a number of functions. I've had since have this described to me that his job, the official part of this, was that he was the guy when she was at a function and whenever the seat next to her was empty, because whoever was in it had to go to the bathroom or whatever, then Jeffrey Epstein, and I assume there were more other people who did this, then was rushed in to fill the seat.
Wow. What more do we know about his relationship with Diana?
That's the sum total of what I know. Except as I say that there was this rivalry, jocular or otherwise, between Epstein and Trump about who could sleep with Diana first.
And in the original 2003 Vanity Fair profile by Vicky Ward, she mentions that Epstein had boasted about managing the Queen's money. Bannon also asks about this, I think. Did he ever speak to you about managing the Queen's money? And do you think maybe he had something to do with the fact that she was in the Panama Papers?
I have no insight into that.
What did Epstein tell you about his meeting with Vladimir Putin? Where did he meet him? Was it a one-on-one? What did Epstein say to Putin, and what did Putin say to Epstein?
I don't know. He only told me that such a meeting took place, and then he described the way he had to hopscotch and change planes and from his plane to other planes to a Putin provided plane to get to Moscow.
But you must have pressed him on it. Did he was he just deliberately being coy? I mean, what did he?
I still don't know if, I mean, I think Epstein was, in large part, I found him to be a reliable source, but not entirely reliable. Did that actually happen? Did it happen the way he said it happened? Did it happen with Putin or a Putin person? There's a variety of things that might be true here and others that might not be true. But in general, it would have been, and he represented that this was about the management, about financial advice. And of course, God knows Putin has a lot of money and a lot of money in a lot of places and probably needed the advice or could have made good use of the advice of someone who was accustomed to dealing with money that is outside of normal channels.
So it was about advice about money laundering rather than advice about Trump.
Well, yeah, I have no insight whether Trump was involved in this discussion, although certainly could have been, but no, in money law, I don't even, I'm not sure I would use the term even money laundering. It wasn't necessarily money laundering. It was, I mean, the way Epstein described it was that one of the advantages of disgrace, and Epstein was a disgraced person, is that you could trust him as a financial manager not to be in the pockets of governments or corporations or banks or any other institutions. That disgrace had left him a true free agent. Now again, this is Epstein spinning Epstein, but it probably also has a grain of truth to it, maybe more than a grain.
So the day before Epstein was arrested, he's flying from Paris to New York and he sets up a meeting with a friend in New York. And what he says is that the Deutsche Bank story is going to bring down Trump. What was that story? And can you just give us a kind of brief
I don't.
overview of
He
Trump's?
was. I know that Epstein was obsessed about Deutsche Bank and about Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank, and Epstein also had a relationship with Deutsche Bank, and broader, he was obsessed with Trump's finances, and what would he believed inevitably come out about them, which would involve a range of, he believed, money laundering, tax schemes, and the kind of things that, well, we wouldn't probably not be surprised to find out Donald Trump was involved in, but also the kinds of things that many people in the real estate business, but many dubious money people, and Epstein, in the end, probably his greatest expertise was in dubious money, were involved with.
You also report there that Trump had, with great hilarity, recounted his sexual assault of E. Jean Carroll to Epstein. Is that a factor too in Trump's animosity at that time towards Epstein? And did Epstein tell you about any other instances of Trump boasting about sexual assault apart from
He,
that one?
the answer is he did. There were other instances of which Epstein, I guess the word would be, regaled me with about Trump and women. Yes.
And have those come out since, or are they? Do those?
Yeah. I mean, Sarah, yeah, yes, those instances or versions of those instances have been recounted by some of the women involved. And I think the only thing new about this is that Epstein had insight into these things, and he maintained that this was from either from Trump or that he had witnessed these things.
And would it have been a case of regaling with each other? Would Epstein have regaled Trump with stories of his sexual assaults?
I think quite possibly, yes.
So there's a really interesting quote that jumped out of me in that chapter too, which is Steve Bannon saying, "There's no journalist in America who will write a judicious book about Jeffrey Epstein." What do you think a judicious book about Jeffrey Epstein looks like from the perspective of Steve Bannon?
I can't speak about the perspective of Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon's perspectives changes with the direction the wind is blowing. But so I can't even begin to imagine the kind of book that Steve had in mind here.
But I suppose in that chapter, the argument put forward when Bannon is coaching Epstein, I think what comes out from that is the way Epstein's friends thought about the case, basically, that it was overblown, that the girls were after money, that the only allegation of underage was, to us it's shocking because it's a 14-year-old girl, and Epstein just says, well, it was fake ID. It seems to me that the judicious book that Epstein was maybe referring to would be a book that says he's been turned into a monster unfairly. He's a highly sexed individual. And this is a compensation culture, Me Too thing that's been blown out of all proportion.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect at that moment in time, Steve was enamored with his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, not least of all because they both hated Donald Trump. So I think he was on the Epstein team at that moment in time.
And in the course of
He
researching
has
your
since gotten off the Epstein team, and it is as though they were like Donald Trump at best passed each other in the hall one day.
when you first started sort of interviewing Epstein and researching what was to potentially become a book, did you talk to any victims? Did you talk to anyone in the
I, you know,
periphery?
I didn't know if I was writing a book. I was just there as an observer, waiting to see if there was a book here, if there was an opportunity here, if there was something to learn here. And then the only book that I was doing, I mean, I started to speak to Epstein in 2014, and by 2016, the book that was being written was Fire and Fury, which was about Epstein's friend, Donald Trump.
But was it obvious to you that Epstein was a monster or not?
Well, I don't know what that means.
Well, I suppose it
Sure,
means
sure. There's a lot of, I mean, yeah, there are monsters. He was a monster of his type. That I mean, I tend not to think in those terms. I think, oh, a monster. This is an interesting. It's an interesting job to describe the kind of monster someone is.
I suppose the reason I'd say monster is because if you think about Melinda Gates, you think about even Marla Maples way back in the 90s, they clearly had a kind of spider sense that this guy was not a good
Well, well,
guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have that sense now, as many people do. This is we don't know what they thought then.
Well, I think it was reported that Marla Maples then was saying, I don't want to
It
hear any.
was no, it was reported that she said she was saying it then. It was not reported that it was not reported then that she said this.
Right, okay. So do you think that's a theme to this story, is people rewriting their own histories with
Well,
Epstein?
I think everyone. I mean, we know that you cannot see Jeffrey Epstein in anything but a very specific light. I mean, a very terrible light. He is a monster, as you say. We must see this from the point of view of the victims. I mean, we know we know now what the culture demands, and I mean, I think you can argue that it fairly demands that. But if you do what I do, that's not really the the main point of entry into thinking about writing about somebody.
And will you write a book about Epstein?
I don't know. I mean, nobody has particularly, I mean, I've tried to write this book. Nobody's particularly, or the publishers that I deal with are not particularly interested or are frightened of it. But, sometimes these stories play out over a long period of time. It's Timing is everything.